Order paper. Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Private members' business, consideration at report stage of Bill S-203, ending the Captivity of Whales and Dolphins Act, standing in the name of Ms. May.
Comme il n'y a aucune motion à l'étape du rapport.
As there is no motion at report stage, the House will now go directly to the report stage vote. Ms. May.
To amend the criminal code and other acts ending the captivity of whales and dolphins be concurred in that report stage. Plaît-il à la Chambre d'adopter cette motion?
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion?
On division?
On division.
On division. Ms. May, seconded by Ms. Hardcastle, moves that Bill S-203, an act to amend the criminal code and other acts ending the captivity of whales and dolphins, be now read a third time and do pass. Debate. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you to those members who are applauding this historic day. We are very, very grateful. And I speak for myself and for many Canadians from coast to coast to coast for the assistance of the Honourable Minister for Fisheries, the assistance of the Honourable Minister for the Environment, and of their parliamentary secretaries in assisting this bill to get through this place after its long, long, long gestation in the Senate. We are extremely grateful for that support to expedite the passage of this bill so that it can receive royal assent before this House adjourns for the summer and the election. I am only going to canvass briefly the elements of the bill. I think we're all very familiar with it. It started in the Senate. It was sponsored by an absolutely terrific Canadian who would make the case, I think, that we should change the mandatory retirement at age 75 for members of the Senate. But Senator Wilfred Moore of Nova Scotia brought this bill forward in 2015, and on his retirement, it was taken up by another magnificent and inspiring leader within this country, former jurist Senator Murray Sinclair. All of their work and all of the witnesses in the long hearings before the Senate made the same point over and over again. In the 21st century, we simply know better than to think cetaceans belong in captivity. We can no longer pretend that the entertainment value of these magnificent, sentient creatures in swimming pools anywhere in Canada is acceptable. Parallel with our efforts on S-203, the former Minister of Fisheries, within a very good bill, Bill C-68, which is currently before the Senate, we certainly hope it will pass soon, and that was again the efforts of our former Minister of Fisheries, the Honourable Member for Beausejour, to whom I once again want to underline my deep thanks for all of his work as Minister of Fisheries. But that bill, C-68, makes it illegal to take a cetacean into captivity in Canadian waters. This bill, S-203, finishes that piece and makes it comprehensive by saying, yes, and we won't breed cetaceans in captivity. We won't buy cetaceans from other countries and keep them in captivity. We are listening to the science, and we are taking the appropriate actions. With the time remaining, Madam Speaker, I just want to thank other people who've played a significant role in seeing this largely nonpartisan effort, supported by thousands and thousands of Canadians, come to this point. I want to thank the Honourable Member from, oh, now you see I've got the names. Well, Courtney Alberni, for sure, and, oh dear, New Westminster, and Toronto Beaches, and Pontiac. This is my, Madam Speaker, I'm doing your job. I'm now trying to remember everybody's name without help. The Minister of Fisheries, the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister for Fisheries, the member for West Nova, the member for another PEI riding. Okay, I think it's Malpeque. No, it's not Malpeque. It's, oh, see, this is terrible, Madam Speaker. Thanking people. The member from Avalon, The member from Charlottetown, thank you very much. The member from Repentigny from the Bloc Québécois, and help from members on all sides of the House, including the party that didn't support the bill. I'd say there's individual members of that party who were very helpful. The NGO community has been very helpful in assisting the process by networking with good scientists and also making sure the community of Canadians concerned with cetaceans received assistance. So Animal Justice and their spectacular lawyer, Camille Labchuk, Humane Society of Canada, Humane Society International, Ontario Captive Animal Watch, Animal Alliance, World Animal Protection, and the Whale Sanctuary Project, and scientists, Dr. Lori Marino, Dr. Ingrid Visser, who testified by video link all the way from New Zealand, Dr. Naomi Rose, Dr. Hal Whitehead of Dalhousie University, and Phil Demers. All of these scientists, NGOs, and individual elected Canadians, and those from the other place, unelected, worked diligently, did our homework with one aim only, to end a practice that we all know is wrong. Pour moi, c'est un grand honneur.
It is a great honor for me. I am proud to be able to steer this private member's business bill. It is a great honor. I am astonished by the level of support in Canada. And I want to say one thing. Thank you.
In your debt, as are our wonderful free whales. And although it was certainly an accident of fate and Parliament that this bill was brought forward by Senator Wilfred Moore, I'll just say one more time, Free Willy. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
So I thank the Leader of the Green Party for her contributions in today's debate and for her contributions every day in this House. They are always welcome and always to the point. I wanted to ask her something about an important aspect of what she mentioned in her comments today about 203, and it's this notion about the sentient nature of so many creatures that exist on our planet. And for a long time, even when many of us were much younger, we learned about dolphins and a bit less so about whales, about that sentient nature. But perhaps you could just elaborate a bit about how that science and that evidence is developing and what the next frontier holds in terms of further protections beyond just whales and dolphins, in terms of protecting the animal kingdom better and the species that exist on this planet.
The Honourable Member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And having had a chance to look at my list, I'm mortified that I had not said the correct writing name of someone who played a huge role, the Honourable Member for Port Moody, Coquitlam. So I want to make sure that's on the record. The science increasingly tells us that it constitutes cruelty to animals to take these cetaceans and keep them in confined spaces. They communicate as families. They communicate as communities. They use language. And the communication requires the space, the range. They are creatures that travel enormous distances. That's part of the health of the animal requires being able to function in community. We saw it in the wild this summer when one of the members of our southern resident killer whale population gave birth to a calf that died almost immediately, and the mother of that whale pushed the calf through the water on her nose, keeping it above the water, although dead, for an astonishing 17-day period of mourning. It's certainly not possible to imagine that these creatures could live in swimming pools. The science is clear.
Comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for St. Catharines.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable leader of the Green Party for her work on this file. Being a member from Niagara, we have an unfortunate place, I don't know how else to describe it, in the backyard of my riding, which is Marineland, which is quite troubling to see such incredible animals being confined to such horrible conditions in small tanks, and having had the fortune to see these animals in the wild traveling kilometers at a time and being confined to such a small space, I was wondering if the honourable member could comment on that business model, and hopefully that this bill will push Marineland to develop a new business model where tourists and residents of Niagara can be proud of something in our own backyard like that. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend from Niagara. It is a difficult thing that when this bill came forward, there were 2 facilities in Canada that held cetaceans in captivity. Vancouver Aquarium quite rightly made a decision voluntarily. It was very controversial also within decisions made by the City of Vancouver Council that they would no longer hold cetaceans in captivity. Marineland's been taking a different approach to fight this bill tooth and nail. I hope Marineland can adjust its business model. I think it's a fantastic tourist attraction. It's in a perfect location, and I'm not a marketer. But if I were a marketer, I'd suggest they talk to the people at Cirque du Soleil. I would suggest they convert that swimming pool for whales in cruel conditions to brilliant acrobats dressed as mermaids, cavorting on trapezes up and down and attracting crowds like they've never seen before. And then we can all say with a big smile on our face, everybody loves Marineland.
We have time for a very brief question. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Niagara Falls.
This debate, I know, will continue, Madam Speaker, but I just want to ask the honourable member, has she had an opportunity to compare what's in her bill to what's in the government's bill, C-68, which is now before the Senate? Because that bill C-68, it covers a lot of ground, but a number of the issues are very similar, if not identical, to what is in her private member's bill. And, okay, I'll ask her to comment.
Yeah, just got to allow her to answer a brief answer from the member from Sandwich Gulf Islands.
To my dear friend from Niagara, I'll just say the C-68 is a terrific piece of legislation. It does ban the taking of whales from Canadian waters, but it does not speak to the pith and substance and core of this bill, which is that you can't continue to hold them in captivity, you can't breed them for captivity, you can't keep whales in captivity.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to join this important debate on Bill S-203, an act to amend the Criminal Code and other acts which would end the captivity of whales and dolphins. Both I and my constituents in Parkdale High Park have anticipated this piece of legislation for some time since it moved from the Senate into this House. And now that it has returned from the Fisheries and Oceans Committee without amendment, I'm pleased to stand and speak in favour of this bill. And it is important to highlight the important work that was done, I believe, by a unanimous Fisheries and Oceans Committee to get it back expeditiously before this House now. And before I speak to the substantive elements of the bill, I want to also add my voice to the voice echoed by the Leader of the Green Party to thank the Senate sponsors for this bill, the now retired Senator Wilfred Moore, Senator Murray Sinclair, who carried the bill forward after Senator Moore's retirement, and the House of Commons sponsor, the Honourable Member for Sandwich Gulf Islands, who just commenced this debate today. All of these individuals have been tireless advocates for this legislation, and their activism and their advocacy has helped carry S-203 to this point that we are at now this afternoon. The bill itself, Madam Speaker, seeks to prohibit the taking of a cetacean into captivity and will amend the Criminal Code to create offences respecting cetaceans in captivity. It will also amend other acts to require a permit for the import of a cetacean into Canada and the export of one from Canada. At the outset, Madam Speaker, I want to begin by tracking our government's progress on the commitment to promote animal welfare rights in Canada and abroad. This is an important issue to me, it is an important issue to the constituents of my riding of Parkdale High Park, as I frequently hear from them about the work we must all do collectively to ensure the welfare of animals. Since 2015, we have made progress on this commitment. In my role as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice, one of the pieces of legislation that I've had the privilege of working on is Bill C-84, an act to amend the Criminal Code in relationship to bestiality and animal fighting. That bill will make important amendments to our criminal code to change the definition of bestiality and to expand the animal fighting provisions to capture more of this conduct and to ensure that offenders are brought to justice. It is indeed a momentous week this week in this chamber, Madam Speaker, because it was only this week that Bill C-84 received third reading and was then sent to the Senate. And I, along with many others, look forward to its study and its eventual passage there. But in the same week that we've dealt with C-84 in this chamber, we are dealing now today with S-203. So an important week for animal rights in this country. Our government has also been active on ensuring proper and humane animal transport with the help of stakeholders such as farmers, industry groups, provinces and territories, and veterinarians. Federally, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, Madam Speaker, administers the enforcement of regulations related to animal transport, and plans are underway to modernize the regulations and humane transport provisions of the health of animals regulations. These have not been updated since the 1970s, Madam Speaker. The need is clear to reduce animal suffering during transportation. In 2017, we also announced an investment of $1.31 million to an entity known as the Canadian Animal Health Coalition, the CAHC, to help ensure the safe transportation of livestock, develop emergency management tools for the livestock industry, and improve animal care assessments. We've also been engaged with stakeholders on the topic of animal welfare during the slaughter process, Madam Speaker. The stakeholders in my riding of Parkdale Park have spoken to me repeatedly about the need to ensure that animals are handled humanely at all points of their lives and that the high standards we expect for animal treatment are upheld. I absolutely agree with this sentiment and that this kind of protection must be a priority, which is why I serve currently as a member of the Liberal Animal Welfare Caucus. But let's get back to the bill before us, S-203. Scientists agree, Madam Speaker, that whales, dolphins, and other extraordinary marine mammals like them should not be kept in captivity or bred in captivity, and doing so amounts to cruelty. Additionally, it is well documented that the live capture of a cetacean and its transport to a foreign habitat harms the natural habitat that the cetaceans originate from. At a time when oceans are under increased threat from a number of sources, such as habitat destruction, coastal pollution, overfishing, and global warming, which all harm these cetaceans, we can scarcely afford to be keeping them in captivity. We must also think about the difficult living conditions for a cetacean that would live in a confined space, such as an aquarium, Madam Speaker, without having any social contact and normal activities that most cetaceans in the wild would enjoy. Those that live in captivity suffer from a higher rate of physical health issues and a lower life expectancy. As well, we know that calves generally suffer from a much higher mortality rate and a lack of emotional connection to others of their species as a result of the limited space when they're in captivity. Therefore, where we may see whales, dolphins, and other cetaceans in an aquarium as a form of entertainment in bygone years, in many cases, we now realize that it actually amounts to animal cruelty. Thus, our government firmly agrees that the capture of cetaceans for the sole purpose of being kept in public display should be ended. Importantly, while the banning of whale captivity is not yet in law, the practice has been in place for some years now, which is a good sign. Bill C-68, which was mentioned early in today's debate in one of the questions by a member opposite, Bill C-68 was introduced by our government, and it's currently in the Senate, and it passed this House in June of last year. It includes amendments to end the captivity of whales unless for rehabilitation. This legislation that is now before us is the next step, and the next important step, Madam Speaker, in ensuring the safety and security of these intelligent and complex creatures. Presently, as was mentioned by the leader of the Green Party, there are 2 aquaria in Canada that were holding cetaceans: the Vancouver Aquarium in BC and Marineland in Ontario. The Vancouver Aquarium, which is a not-for-profit institution, currently has a Pacific white-sided dolphin that was rescued from the wild and deemed unreleasable, as well as 5 belugas on loan to the aquaria in the United States. the Vancouver Park Board has not permitted the aquarium to hold cetaceans captured from the wild for display purposes since 1996, but it does work with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to respond to cetaceans in the wild requiring rescue and rehabilitation. Marineland holds the remaining balance of cetaceans, including one orca. The Ministry of Fisheries retains the authority to issue a license for the capture of live cetaceans. However, only one such license has actually been issued over the past decade, Madam Speaker, and that was for the rescue and rehabilitation of a stranded Sudorka calf. No license has been issued for the purpose of displaying a cetacean publicly in over 20 years. As stated earlier, Madam Speaker, it has been the practice of successive Canadian governments that cetaceans not be captured or placed in captivity unless for rehabilitation. It is also important to note that the elements of Bill S-203 that relate to the protection of the rights of Indigenous persons, some of which feature whales and dolphins as a key component of their culture and traditions. These provisions were not actually initially part of the bill, and through a significant consultation process, Madam Speaker, that took place while S-203 was being studied in the Senate, the bill was sufficiently and appropriately altered. It is essential to consider and address the needs of Indigenous peoples, and this is something that I've heard frequently from the knowledgeable, engaged constituents of my riding of Parkdale High Park, but literally from people right around the country. What they've always echoed to me is that we in this place as legislators must apply an Indigenous lens to all of the legislation, government or otherwise, that comes before us. And I'm pleased to see that that is in fact exactly what was done in the Senate when they engaged in those consultations. This legislation complements our government's work, which I've outlined. We are committed to the recovery and protection of marine mammals. This commitment is evident through another investment which we have made, which is a $1.5 billion investment into what is a very historic oceans protections plan, which would help restore our marine ecosystems in partnership with our Indigenous partners. As well, there has been a 5-year, $167 million investment into what is called the Whales Initiative, which will take concrete steps to help endangered whales and reduce the impact of human-caused threats, as well as our latest announcement of $61 million for measures in support of the southern resident killer whale population off of the coast of British Columbia. This bill, S-203, is one aspect of the support that our government has given to marine animals and their habitat. S-203 is supported by very significant leaders in the field of marine science and welfare, including Humane Canada, Animal Justice, and even the former head trainer at Marineland itself, Mr. Phil Demers, who's expressed support for the measures in this bill. What I think we are seeing here, Madam Speaker, with S-203 is the proper and necessary evolution of rights protection for animals in this country. It is a bill whose time has come. It is a bill that I'm very proud to support on behalf of my constituents and as a member of the government. I urge all members to do the same. Merci beaucoup.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for North Okanagan, Shuswap.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is a pleasure to rise and speak to Bill S-203, an act to amend the criminal code and other acts leading to ending the captivity of whales and dolphins. This bill amends the criminal code to create offences respecting cetaceans in captivity. It also amends the Fisheries Act to prohibit the taking of cetaceans into captivity, and the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulations of International and Interprovincial Trade Act to require a permit for the import of a cetacean into Canada and the export of a cetacean from Canada. Madam Speaker, this bill seems to be falling under the same umbrella, the same mode of operation of this government. It's being rushed through this House. I wasn't able to attend the day that the bill was supposed to be debated clause by clause, or was debated clause by clause, where amendments might be considered at the Standing Committee on Fisheries for amendments to be brought back to the House. But it's my understanding that even the Liberal government put forward 4 amendments for this bill, had these amendments drafted, because they could see that the bill was flawed. So they drafted these amendments, corrections to a bill that's been out there for a lengthy period of time. But when it actually came time to debate those amendments, the Liberals drew them back. Now, there's only speculation, but it's speculation that it was because of pressure from outside groups, behind closed doors, under cabinet confidence, something that the public can't have access to, that they were pressured to withdraw those amendments. That's a concerning factor for me, Madam Speaker, as the Deputy Shadow Minister for Fisheries, Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard, and a member of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. We seem to see a trend recurring over and over again where the government promises consultation and claims to do the consultation with the locals and the people that are affected, the businesses, the aquariums, the fishermen that might be affected by laws they're changing or regulations they're changing. And then after they've done all that supposed consultation, they go back behind closed doors where they appear to be lobbied by foreign interest groups, special interest groups, and that lobbying seems to have more effect than the open and transparent consultation process that should be taking place with an open and transparent government, which unfortunately we really seem to be lacking right now. Now, S-203 has been rushed through the House of Commons without study, and in short time that the members of Parliament have had, many issues have been flagged. These issues range from the constitutional concerns to practical considerations that have been simply overlooked. This happens when legislation is rushed through and not carefully considered. Had the members been given more time to review and study the bill, many of these problems could have been solved with simple amendments. These amendments would benefit cetaceans, Canadians, and stakeholders alike. Madam Speaker, just recently another major issue that was flagged in S-203, this one could impact hundreds of thousands of Canadians and their vacation plans over time. As it currently reads, S-203 could negatively impact Canadians' Canada's travel and tourism industry. More specifically, S-203 could negatively impact travel agencies and Canadian vacationers who travel abroad and visit captive cetaceans in other countries. Now, it's been argued that this isn't the case, but legal advice cannot irrefutably dissolve this. They cannot say for certain that that is not the case. It's going to have to take court action, a court decision to say whether that's the case. I have before me a letter recently from Marineland that raises the concerns in great deal, and I'll quote from that. There was considerable discussion at the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans with respect to the prohibition on using cetaceans in performances for entertainment purposes and the broadness of the legislation. The section reads, everyone commits an offense who promotes, arranges, conducts, assists in, receives money for, or takes part in any meeting, competition, exhibition, pastime, practice, display, or event at or in the course of which captive cetaceans are used for performance, for entertainment purposes, unless such performance is authorized pursuant to a license issued by the Lieutenant Governor in Council of the province by such other person or authority in a province as may be specified by the Lieutenant Governor in Council. A plain reading of the legislation offers no ambiguity. It says everyone, which means every human being in Canada commits an offense when they do any of the following: promotes, arranges, conducts, assists in, receives money for, or takes part in. Travel agents in Canada promote and receive money for selling excursions to constituents of ours who then take part in, and many end up promoting the experience of their own on social media in Canada. The exemption that is proposed in the section will not apply to the shows that today's travel agents in our communities are actively promoting and receiving money from, nor will it apply to constituents who take part in these shows and may promote it and encourage others on social media to participate in similar shows in the future. Department of Justice lawyers were not able to refute Marineland of Canada's contention that travel agents who promote and receive money from selling tickets to such shows occurring outside of Canada will not be criminally charged for doing so. This is the department's own justice lawyers not able to refute that travel agents who promote or receive money from selling tickets to such shows occurring outside of Canada will not be criminally charged for doing so. While Marineland is not concerned about this clause of legislation impacting their facility, we simply cannot offer that such a show for entertainment purposes. They believe this clause highlights the perils of using private members' legislation originating in the Senate to amend the Criminal Code of Canada. They've reviewed travel agency offerings throughout Canada and have found that there are travel agents in every Canadian province that promote and sell tickets to and therefore receive money from captive swim with the dolphin experiences and captive cetacean shows that have been covered by S-203. The Department of Justice lawyer suggesting it is unlikely these people or Canadians who urge their friends on Facebook to swim with the dolphins on their next trip will not be prosecuted does not go far enough in addressing what is clearly a flaw in S-203. Every single Canadian has a positive obligation to comply with all relevant sections of the criminal code at all times. And simply stating that while an act might be illegal because the person breaking the law is unlikely to be prosecuted is not okay. If members pass S-203 with the current wording contained in the entertainment prohibition, you will be criminalizing the actions of vacationers from ridings who head south and participate in these lawful activities, and the travel agents in ridings and provinces who sell these excursions. Is it truly the intention to leave Canadians in a position where posting about their lawful experience in another country can become a criminal offense if they encourage others to swim with the dolphins when they go on a vacation? Is it truly the intention to criminally charge travel agents for selling vacations to Hawaii, Mexico, Cuba, the Bahamas, and including an excursion that involves swimming with the dolphins or a captive cetacean show? As it is currently written, that is what the legislation will do, and what we would be endorsing if we vote for it. It will certainly be of interest.
Unfortunately, the member's time is up. No. I'm sure he had more to say, but I'm sure that his colleagues at some point will be able to add. Resuming debate, the honourable member, l'honorable député de Sherbrooke.
The honourable member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to speak on the behalf of my constituents to this bill. I know that the majority of them will be supporting this bill as well. It's a bill from the Senate. It's before us at third reading today. And I'd just like to take a few moments to speak to the bill and then to say that I hope that it will receive royal assent. It's a pleasure for me to express my support for this bill on behalf of the NDP, which aims to eliminate captivity of cetaceans. And I believe that no one will challenge the scientific evidence showing that cetaceans are very intelligent creatures. They must be treated well so they can live happily. And so I think that no one in this House will challenge the fact that they are particularly intelligent animals. And this bill aims to ensure that an end is put to captivity with some notable exceptions for rehabilitation, for example, and some other cases of scientific research that ideally in a natural environment so that research can be conducted on these species in their natural environment. So this is a very reasonable and balanced bill that makes good sense. And I know that the people of Sherbrooke support this idea. To bring forth some scientific data, cetaceans in captivity have a reduced life expectancy. Infant mortality is higher, and the facilities they're kept in can't meet their social needs because they need a great deal of space to live in, and that is the fundamental reason why this is such a good bill. The facilities, regardless of their size, Madam Speaker, realistically cannot be large enough to take into account the biological and social needs of these animals. When they're captured, they experience distress. They can't swim the distances they need to. They spend some 80% of their time at the surface when they're in captivity, which is also not natural for them. Normally, they spend that amount of time in the water below the surface when they're in their natural environment. They can't hunt in captivity. Sometimes they're they have very sophisticated methods for hunting, but there is nothing to hunt in their environment, their captive environment. They're fed. The food is not as diversified as what they would be eating in their natural environment either. They suffer from solitude when they are separated from others in their pod. They are oftentimes alone, offspring separated for their mothers or sent otherwhere in captivity to be on display for the public. There's also the issue of the absence of a sound that they normally listen to in captivity. In addition to many cases, they're exposed to sound that come from the facilities, the public that want in attendance. This creates a great deal of sound that doesn't normally exist in their natural environment. And it has been shown that keeping these animals in captivity is extremely cruel. People have been made aware of the situation, and a few months back, in fact, a few weeks back, in Russia, there are scores of cetaceans being kept in close confines. They can't swim to exercise their muscles, and I believe that everyone was horrified by the images in Quebec, in Canada, in Sherbrooke. People expect us to have exemplary practices and to not allow them to be kept in captivity. This is a balanced bill. The majority of people in my riding agree with putting an end to this practice. We need to show leadership at the international level. and we must not be complicit in such cruel practices. So, Madam Speaker, I thank you for the time, and I congratulate the person behind this, the sponsor of the bill in the other place, the sponsor in this place, and all who have contributed to the debate that will help this bill move forward so that it receives royal assent as quickly as possible. I will stop here and to ensure that the bill can proceed and receive royal assent as quickly as possible. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat. The honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak to Bill S-203, an act to amend the Criminal Code and other acts, also known as the Act for Ending the Captivity of Whales and Dolphins. The bill proposes changes to 3 acts: the Criminal Code, the Fisheries Act, and the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulation of International and Provincial Trade Act, an act whose name didn't take advantage of creative acronym design. I want to begin by first stating that I am indeed, like Canadians across the country, in favor of this bill, and I know that this government supports this bill. I actually deferred my opportunity to speak on my own private member's motion M-196 and worked with the member of Saanich Gulf Islands in order to help advance this important legislation before the session ends. And who knows, maybe I won't get an opportunity to speak on my motion, but I know that this is very important to Canadians, and seeing it so close to the finish line, it felt like it was the right move to make. I'm honored by the small role that I may have been able to play in advancing the common good across party lines and between the other place and this place. I also want to highlight the Liberal members of the Fisheries Committee that passed this bill unamended at their committee. Their leadership
Their leadership enabled this bill to move forward, and it is now closer to being debated than before.
We have come to learn more about the living needs of whales and other cetaceans, that keeping them in captivity is simply the wrong thing to do. Et ce n'est pas seulement au Canada.
And it's not just in Canada, but across the world, there is support for ending captivity. Throughout Canada, in places around Newfoundland, in the Baie des Chaleurs to Vancouver, in our oceans, Canadians can see the most majestic marine mammals in their natural environments.
Animals that living in captivity is far from in their best interest, and that is why Canadians across the country have shown continued support for banning whales in captivity. I would also like to add that while the banning of whale captivity is not yet in legislation, the practice has been in place for years in Canada, and our government continues to support this. Le permis de capture des
The permits for capturing living cetaceans are only delivered by the department for scientific research or rehabilitation.
Only one license has been issued for the rehabilitation of a live stranded pseudo-orca calf. Our government has also taken notice of the growing concern to ensure that cetaceans are not being captured for the sole purpose of being kept for public display. That is why our government introduced Bill C-68, which will currently before the committee in the other place and will be reported out of committee, we hope, by next week, which contains amendments that would prohibit the captivity of whales and allow the minister to put in place regulations to ban the import and export of cetaceans. Today, of course, there are only 2 facilities in Canada that house cetaceans: Marine Land in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and the Vancouver Aquarium in British Columbia. Marine Land, of course, is a commercial facility with approximately 60 cetaceans. Most are belugas, with one being a killer whale. The Vancouver Aquarium is a not-for-profit facility that has 1 cetacean at its facility, a 30-year-old Pacific white-sided dolphin that was rescued from the wild and has been deemed to be unfit for release back into the wild. The Vancouver Aquarium works with Fisheries and Oceans Canada to rescue and rehabilitate marine mammals in distress. Mais nous savons que nous devons...
But we know that we must do more to ensure that cetaceans continue to be protected. That's why we must clearly state through legislation that whales should not be in captivity. Today, we're debating the ability for them to remain in their natural environment. I also want to point out the importance and need for ensuring that their marine environments are protected.
Real investments to protect and conserve our marine environment. In 2016, the Prime Minister announced $1.5 billion for the Oceans Protection Plan, which has since funded 55 coastal restoration projects in helping to address threats to marine mammals from vessel noise and collisions, increased our on-scene environmental response capacity, and much, much more. As part of Budget 2018, this government also announced $167.4 million for the Whales Initiative, which has further funded recovery plans for endangered species such as the southern resident killer whale, beluga whale, and in my area of the world, the North Atlantic right whale. Notre gouvernement continue de prendre.
Our government continues to take steps to protect their environments. We introduced new standards for marine environments to ensure that areas of ecological importance will not be perturbed by oil and gas exploration. That follows on the heels of a consultative committee, an expert committee on marine zones, and this has the support of Canada and the world.
Will help ensure for a healthy ocean and the health of our marine species such as whales and dolphins a good future. But I really cannot say enough about the Oceans Protection Plan, Madam Speaker. Infrastructure, coastal restoration, abandoned, derelict, and wrecked vessel programs, Arctic marine protection, science and research, pilotage review. In my riding of St. John's East, there's an institute called the Marine Institute. I had the good fortune to be there in September of 2011 with the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard at the time, now our good friend from Beausejour who is on leave, the former Minister of Veterans Affairs, now the Minister of Indigenous Services, my good friend and colleague, the member for Avalon, to announce important work that's being done to restore marine habitat in Avalon using expertise that comes from the university in my riding, the Marine Institute. And we announced a program to reestablish the eel beds in Placentia Bay to increase that habitat. This is where lots of species, scallops, shrimp, cod, whales, start their lives. And so it's important to protect these areas, improve the health and ability of our oceans to be fully functioning after, in certain areas where they've become damaged due to industrial activity. This particular project, is small in comparison to the overall total. It's about $7.4 million. And although it was announced on my on the anniversary of my wedding anniversary, my wife wasn't too upset with that. We had opportunity to celebrate later. It didn't impact. But the money is actually already being spent. Last summer, scientists were able to go out into Placentia Bay, do the diving, and begin that restoration work in Placentia Bay that will pay dividends for years to come. And so it's wonderful to work with the member from Saanich Gulf Islands on this. And as we did a little bit of social media earlier when we did the swap for times, a lot of people came back to me and asked some important questions on how our government can be supporting industrial activity in the oil and gas sector and at the same time supporting environmental protections. And they felt that it was counterintuitive or perhaps even contradictory, but it can be no farther from the truth, Madam Speaker. The only way that governments can move forward and protect the environment and fund a transition of our economy to a clean economy is with economic growth from our traditional sectors and resource development. We must continue to work on demand side, and this means the purchasing decisions made by consumers and how they engage in their daily lives, but at the same time allow our natural resource sectors to engage in environmentally responsible development so that we can tap into export markets. We can't allow countries that don't have good environmental records to capitalize on oil and gas profits through their exports and not allow our industry to thrive. That's why our government at the same time is doing all this great work to help whales in the wild and help prevent whales in captivity, is also funding Trans Mountain expansion and has recently approved, with many conditions, the continued exploration for 2 projects in northeast coast of Newfoundland and Labrador for oil exploration. ExxonMobil and Equinor have the opportunity now this summer and over the course of the next decade to drill exploratory drills in our waters, subject to conditions that protect the right whales, that protect our oceans, and we use this prosperity, Madam Speaker, to fund things like the Ocean Protection Plan. And so I encourage,
I will conclude by saying that I'm happy today to be here to join my voice to that of Canadians from across the country who have spoken in favor of ending captivity of whales and dolphins. For too long, they have been kept in captivity, and we know that that must be changed.
Captivity, Madam Speaker. They belong in the wild, and I encourage all members to support this legislation. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Resuming debate, the honour member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Oh, bravo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'm pleased to be joining debate on S-203, of which I have gotten a fair volume of correspondence from constituents in my riding of Calgary-Shepherd, and whom I'm pleased to represent. So a lot of them were sent to me on behalf of various organizations across Canada who have been promoting S-203 as a solution to cetaceans in captivity. Before I continue on more into the bill, I want to make one mention. The member for St. John's East, I think, has had the best observation about a Senate bill I have ever heard in this chamber, that this bill didn't take advantage of creative acronym design. It's been 4 years, I'll give him that. That is probably the one observation I have not looked at, how acronyms are created with certain bills. So I'll give him kudos for that one, but not for the contents of what he said, especially on the Oceans Protection Plan, which is a $1.5 billion plan with very little spending so far. The Coast Guard ships that have been built are still in dock in Nanaimo with no crews to service them and to actually use them in the field. I have not seen any spending, any actual spending of the dollars associated with the plan. So that's kind of the first the part of my reply to what he mentioned. To the substance of the bill, though, I feel as if I need to do an introduction. I have been writing back to my constituents who have been writing to me on S-203, and I've had a back and forth with a few of them, disagreements over some of the technical aspects of the bill, because one thing I want to mention is I think that the bill actually broaches a certain area of provincial jurisdiction, animal welfare laws typically, by going after the criminal code. And it's a way for Parliament to make a judgment call about a certain practice in Canadian society. And in this case is the captivity of cetaceans. And of course, I share the same concern that a lot of my constituents have, and a lot of members of Parliament in this chamber have expressed, over the necessary protection of whales, dolphins, and other aquatic animals. Nobody wants to see them suffer. I think the member for Sherbrooke brought up an example of what happens in the Russian Federation. And of course, there are examples all over the world of animal husbandry practices, captivity practices that are abhorrent, that most of us would say is brutal, and it should not be happening, but unfortunately it does, because people use animals for entertainment purposes. They use them also to generate an income as well. To some of the historical aspects, as I think another member mentioned, there's been no live capture since 1992. It's true that wild beluga whales and bottlenose dolphins have been imported from foreign sources. It's been reported also in various CBC articles and other media that parts of, like I said, parts of this bill seem to be veering into an area of provincial jurisdictions as animal welfare laws, and Ontario has already banned captivity and breeding in captivity of orcas, which is one of the concerns I had with the bill going the route of amending the criminal code. And it's perhaps a more process issue that I have with it. I just believe, again, going back to the previous debate we had earlier today on C-55, is the intent of the bill, like this one, S-203, the intent, I don't think a great many members disagree with the principle of the matter. It's the execution that we have concerns with. And I have a few scientists who I'm going to quote, some that provided testimony at committee or committees, and then some who provided feedback through correspondence that I've received and that the member for Caribou Prince George received as well. I want to mention that this is a very unusual bill because it's received the review over 17 committee meetings in an 8-month period. It was tabled way back in 2015, and it's been on the public record for quite a long time. It's been debated for quite a long time. It had what I would say is a difficult process through that other place, the Senate chamber, with several senators expressing deep concern over, again, the technical aspect of the bill, its interaction with provincial laws and federal jurisdiction over the criminal code. And that's where I'm going to express some of my concerns as well over that particular area. Again, the provinces are responsible for passing animal welfare laws, and we have in this chamber, like on the bestiality bill that the parliamentary secretary for the Minister of Justice mentioned before, have pronounced ourselves on matters affecting what I would also think is an area of perhaps at least partial provincial jurisdiction. I don't think there's anything wrong in going about the road of the criminal code, but in this case particularly, the member for North Okanagan-Shuswap did mention that it could potentially criminalize individuals that the law did not intend to criminalize their activities in the booking of travel vacations, in the booking of some service provision in tourism. I don't think that was the intent of the law, but I have seen before, like I've mentioned in this House on C-55, regulations passed by officials, so written by officials, confirmed through the gazetting process that the Government of Canada has. The intention is lost typically. Nice words are shared by officials about the intent of a bill when the members of parliament and senators express their will by passing a piece of legislation, but then the actual execution is not there. And sometimes this debate amongst officials lasts well over a decade, 2 or 3 decades, quibbling over exactly what the law permits you to do and to whom it can apply. And that's, I think, the concerns expressed by the member for North Okanagan-Shuswap on our side, which is the lens with which the criminal code will be applied may be broadened by officials in the departments at a later point, far beyond the lifespan of any member here, on our elected lifespan at least. I wish all members good health, but I think that there's a concern there about that mission creep, about going after individuals, or perhaps the application of the law being on individuals that we did not intend it to be upon. And that's why there were many amendments moved at committee by the opposition side to try and improve and clarify this particular piece of legislation. Of course, not to obstruct it, but attempting to amend a piece of legislation is never about obstruction. It is about an improvement to the bill, especially when the intent is there, but the technical aspect, the delivery of the bill and its execution, is perhaps lacking. So to those scientists that I wanted to mention, and this is from comments made by the member for Caribou, Prince George, and it's recounting an email from Dr. Laura Graham, a professor at the University of Guelph. So I'm just going to read the quotes. I can perhaps express some of my thoughts on the scientist's view on the impact this bill would have. So her specialty is endocrinology and reproductive physiology of wildlife species, including looking at factors that can impact the welfare of wildlife species managed by humans, and using science to solve some of the challenges that wildlife managers face as they work towards optimizing the welfare of animals in their care, and then having that information thereafter be used just in general practices of the Crown when it's managing wildlife populations on behalf of Canadians. So I'm going to read a direct quote from that correspondence that the member for Caribou Prince George read, so I can remind the Chamber of what was said. As an expert in endangered species physiology, I can tell you that this bill is short-sighted and will do irreparable harm to critical research on the marine mammals listed under SARA. This is the Species at Risk Act, including the Salish orca. Over 90% of what we know about marine mammal biology is based on research done on individuals under human care, and we need these captive animals to develop research techniques that can be applied to free-ranging animals. The discussion goes on from there, and the quotations given by this particular specialist, I think, are really important to keep in mind. Like I've said, like many members have said, that perhaps the economic operations of the aquariums and those operations that save marine mammals and then perhaps keep them temporarily in captivity so they can nurse them back to health, typically, they have some research component to it. So it's never a pure economic operation. And again, it could be wrong in the case of marine land, which seems to be the best example being used. I am a member from Calgary after all, so I don't head out to Toronto too often. But I think on this particular piece of legislation. I think the intent is there, but the execution is lacking. And as I read from the scientists there, I think there'll be harm done on the research side of things that we were not able to fix at committee, and those the 8 months, 17 committee meetings were not able to reach that mechanics fixing in the bill. And that's why I will be voting against this piece of legislation, just as I've been telling my constituents I have been. And so, Madam Speaker, I'm imploring all members to look at that fact and to vote against this particular law.
Well done.
La période prévue pour l'étude des affaires.
The time provided for the consideration of private members' business has now expired. The order is dropped to the bottom of the order of precedence on the order paper.
This House stands adjourned until next Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1. And I wish all the mothers a very happy Mother's Day this weekend. Don't forget to spoil your wives. Have a good night.